Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for the opportunity to be here. I'm a little bit, as an alum of Tufts, this is a little bit overwhelming. In the room today is probably one of the 2 or 3 most influential professors I had when I was here, Marianne Wolf, who had a huge impact on me, and I haven't seen her in 25 years. And it's to be on the same panel with her is certainly an incredible honor. And second of all, and I'll do this briefly, one of the last things I did at Tufts when I was here in 1985 was I produced a jazz concert series that was, the capstone event was a concert by B.B. King in this room, which was broadcast by PBS and ran for years because relatives of mine would see me on some PBS thing with B.B. King and they'd say, how the hell did you pull that off, right? So it's great to be here all these years later. What I want to talk about today is, and I think John Tisch gave an unbelievable set of framing remarks for the day, and the idea, this powerful idea of what Tisch College represents and the challenges that we face. And I could spend a lot of time as somebody who lives and breathes national and international politics based in Washington about these enormous challenges, particularly the day after we almost had a government shutdown, right? It's easy to live, I think, in the place of challenge, but what I want to live in this morning is the sense of that we're entering an age of almost unprecedented possibility for all of humankind. And that's what I'd like to talk about in my 8 minutes and 25 seconds to remain. If you think back, I want to make 3 key points. First, I'm going to reference FDR. Second is about how media and technology is changing everything that we do. And third is this idea of a global youth generation that is the largest generation in world history that will shape the 21st century in ways that I don't think we can yet imagine, but at least we're a little bit inspired by the students here that we've all met at Tufts. So first, FDR. In the aftermath of World War II, there was a radical vision that the world embraced about how we were going to organize ourselves as civil societies, that we embraced these 4 notions of political liberty, democracy, rule of law, and open trade as the basic understanding of how government and people would relate to one another. That had not been the case up until that point. It may have been the case here in the United States, and certainly starting in the 18th century with what our founding fathers did, but to embrace it as a global goal of how we all related to one another, I think we have to look back at that period and recognize what a radical thing came out of World War II. And it ended, we started to see right away, right, the end of imperialism that took place, colonialism went away. We started to see a very different sense of opportunity for all of humanity. And I think 70 years later, I have to believe that, that FDR and Churchill and Truman and all these folks who built the UN and this new global vision will be looking back at the time with great glee and happiness. Because what we've seen during that period, right, has been an extraordinary explosion of the humankind. We've seen no great global conflagrations. We've seen extraordinary efforts and progress in attacking poverty and isolation and despair. We've seen more governments today under democratic rule than any time in all of human history. We've seen explosions in science and knowledge that are just extraordinary to think back and where things were. I mean, when I went to Talwar in 1982, right, to make a phone call to my parents, I had to wait for 45 minutes, right, for the phone company to call me back. I couldn't even make a direct phone call to another person, right? It's sort of hard to imagine. That wasn't all that long ago. Extraordinary changes that have gone on in the world to have given us so much. There's been so much progress, right, in humankind. And what we're seeing is developing nations all around the world embracing this sense of global progress. But where we go now, and I think this is what's most interesting about this sense that we have made tremendous strides as humankind over the last 70, 80 years, is that I think what's in front of us is even greater than what just went on. That the opportunities that we face, the opportunities that we have and the sense of possibility is greater than what just went on. And let me make for 2 reasons why. You know what, I'm a little nervous today. I speak all over the world in this kind of stuff. And I'm more nervous today speaking at Tufts, I think, than I am when I addressed 200 members of Congress, right, in Washington. So just bear with me. And I think my wife's going to get mad at me when she hears that, right? So 2 thoughts. First is, that the tools we have to attack isolation, poverty, despair, ignorance, fanaticism, and all the ills of the modern world are greater today than we've ever had. Why? Because if you look back at European history and our own history of the West, what helped cause the Renaissance and the Enlightenment was radical democratization of information, right? It was the printing press which took knowledge and wisdom out of the hands of a few and gave it to the many. We are seeing that with the development of the global communications network now happen on steroids all around the world. Within a few years, right, within this decade, every person in the world will be connected through a mobile device. It's coming very soon. We're already at about 65%. Almost 2/3 of all the people in the world already have the capacity to access this global communications network and all of the world's knowledge. And it means that a farmer making $2 a day in Chiapas, Mexico, or somebody in rural India will have the ability to access all the same knowledge that my son, 10-year-old son, can do on a 24-inch iMac today. That is a radical moment in human history. There is no similar set of events that have happened in our past because all of the knowledge of the world will be available to all of the people of the world in a way that was, for those of you who are in the education business, right, is sort of an unimaginable thing. And it means that this gap between rich and poor, the ability for regular everyday people to embrace modernity and the modern world is going to be very different in the 21st century. And I think that these tools that we can use to help pull people out of, as I said, isolation, poverty, despair, and ignorance are greater than they've ever been. And we know that education and knowledge is really, in many ways, the greatest weapon against fanatical governments and bad governance all around the world. The second thing is what's happening with global youth. I mean, we talk in the US today about the millennial generation, right? Many of you who are here today are part of that generation, the largest generation in all of American history. I mean, in politics, young people are talked about as if it's the youth table, right? I mean, you are young people, there's an adults table, and then there's young people, right? But the truth is, in our culture and society, this millennial generation is going to drive everything in the 21st century in America. The boomers, when they came of age, right, set politics and culture and media in the 20th century, the millennials are going to do it for the 21st century here in the United States because of their size. But what we should think about is that there's, in essence, a global youth generation now. The young kids who are 20 years old today, sitting in this room, are tied together through this global network, right, to 20-year-olds in Tahrir Square and 21-year-olds in Jakarta and all of these other people. Because right now, if you look at the population distribution of the world, more than 50% of the people alive today are under 30 around the world. And it means that we have this there is now, this youth generation is the largest generation in all of human history, right? There's never been a demographic reality like we're facing now, where you have a global, economic and geopolitical context. You've seen the developing world sort of coming out of the shackles of their own dark ages. There's now this universal connectivity. And you can imagine, and we've seen it in the Middle East and North Africa, we've seen this incredible desire for human dignity, for a better life, where people were organizing using more modern tools, right, to throw off the shackles of bad governance, to give them the same things that we've had in this country for so long. And so part of what I just want to end with in my remarks is we think about this day here that is in front of us and a remarkable day that it is, and I just want to thank Tisch College for letting me be part of this in a small way, is that if you think about the math of this for a second, we have billions of people alive today. First of all, there's more people alive today than there's probably been in all of human history combined, right? I mean, if you look back at just how many people have lived and the size of the population. And what we know is that there are more people today able to contribute to commerce, to creativity, right, to civil society, all the things that we've been talking about today, because of rising standards of living, because of greater education levels, because they're going to have access to knowledge and a sense that they're not in all this, they're not in this alone, that there are other people like them around the world that they can learn from and collaborate and cooperate. And I think John Tisch is completely right, that the 21st century is going to be a century of collaboration and cooperation in the way that we think about how to organize ourselves. But these billions of people are going to accelerate knowledge and creativity in ways that I think are unimaginable. It's not going to be just American scientists figuring out how to crack the genome. They're going to be scientists in every country in the world. And that the amount of knowledge that's going to be created in the next 30 to 40 years, I would argue, is going to be greater than all the knowledge created through all of human history to this moment before. Because there are going to be billions of people contributing to this, as opposed to a few million or tens of millions of people in Western countries. The world is opening up. And so what I want to conclude with is that for all the challenges that we face, and they are huge and daunting as we enter the 21st century, I'd like to think of this century as an age of extraordinary possibility, that more is possible now than ever before in human history. And for policymakers and leaders, our great challenge is to make sure that that future is realized, because the upside is so great, and it would be such a tragedy if we couldn't realize it all together. Thank you, everybody, very much.